Great. Great. I wanted to welcome everyone. My name is Chrissy Kirchhoffer, and I am Outreach Coordinator for the National Vortex Resistance Coordinating Committee. And the session that we're going to start is on global vortex resistance. So we'll be hearing from people throughout the world who are doing vortex resistance in various forms, or vortex refusal, as it came up in the last session. So Lincoln Rice is going to be presenting with the National Vortex Resistance and Resistance in the United States. And then Jan Berg with the network's Friedensdaughter in Germany. Jonathan Monders is with Conscience UK, will be sharing with us. Doug Hewitt-White and Linda Thayer with Conscience Canada. And we'll be hearing from Derek Brett with Conscience, the Center for Peace Tax International, also called CPTI. So again, want to welcome everybody and thank you for being here. And yeah, as it was mentioned, the session will be recorded and we'll have questions and answers at the end. So turn it over to Lincoln Rice.
Right. Thank you, Chrissy. So I'm just going to give a very brief what's happening in the U.S. So this coming fall will mark 43 years since the founding of the National War Tax Resistance Coordinating Committee, otherwise known as NWTRCC in the United States. This was the culmination of a war tax resistance movement that had grown substantially in the United States during the 70s and 80s that wanted to be more connected. Although the movement remained strong through the 1980s, the movement began to contract during the 90s. In 1990, NWTRCC had 80 national and local affiliates, and there were 40 alternative funds. Today, NWTRCC has about 3 dozen affiliates, and there are 2 main alternative funds remaining. Since most employees in the U.S. can control their income tax withholding, something that's not true everywhere else in the world, war tax resistance here is open to almost all people. We believe that the growth of the internet and the availability of materials online for free is one of the reasons that's led to fewer interpersonal interactions with war tax resistors and kind of a shrinking in the size of war tax resistance local groups around the United States. NWTRCC still hosts 2 gatherings each year. Since 2015, our gatherings have included in-person and online components. Since the COVID-19 pandemic, some of our gatherings have been solely on Zoom, as is the case this weekend. But our online gatherings have had the added bonus of being able to welcome participants from Geneva, Catalonia, London, Alaska, Hawaii, and elsewhere that would not normally attend in-person meetings. Since the invasion of Gaza, largely using U.S. weaponry, NWTRCC has seen a historic increase in interest for war tax resistance information. Before the invasion of Gaza, NWTRCC had steady internet traffic on its website, and we averaged 40,000 unique visitors to our website each year, with the average visitor looking at 9 pages on our website. But only a fraction of these visitors would end up calling or emailing the office. In the 6 months following the invasion of Gaza, NWTRCC's website crashed 3 times because we needed to keep expanding the bandwidth because of the large increase in interest. And we started during last year's tax season, averaged about 20,000 unique visitors each month. And that trend continued this tax season also. Our tax day in the United States is April 15th. And so in February, March, and April, we averaged nearly 20,000 visitors a month. During last year and this year's tax season, we hosted or joined other groups used on Zoom for many war tax resistance 101s, almost on a weekly basis, and sometimes more often, which was unheard of before the invasion of Gaza. From direct contact that we have via email and phone calls, we can confirm there has been an increase in war tax resistance. Also, many new resistors contact our office or have been contacting our office when they receive their first mailed notice of non-payment from the U.S. Internal Revenue Service, also called the IRS. We've also seen an increase in letters sent to longtime war tax resistors threatening future levy and garnishments. Recently, IRS collection among war tax resistors has been very low and sporadic, which was also the case in the couple years before the pandemic. During the pandemic, the IRS paused garnishments on wages and Social Security payments. And even though now quite a while ago they could have restarted garnishments on Social Security, as of yet, maybe I'll hear from some differently this weekend, but as of when I've talked to people last, I've not heard of anyone for whom these Social Security garnishments have restarted just because of the lack of funding with the IRS here. Although a second Trump presidency has again increased interest in war tax resistance, largely inspired by Trump's authoritarian methods, it has also created additional fear about possible weaponizing of the IRS. At this point, it is still too early to discern exactly how Trump would weaponize the IRS while at the same time defunding it and firing much of its workforce. So a significant component of Nutric's role right now and moving forward will be to kind of keep our ear to the ground and pass on information about that as we become aware of it. So I'll pause there so we can provide more time for our other speakers.
Great. Yeah, if you would share with us, Jan.
Okay. I've prepared some presentation for you, but you will excuse me not just to follow what I prepared, but to tell you freely, to give you more information. So just briefly, we are called Netzwerk Friedenssteuer, which is translated into Network Peace Tax. And don't worry about rethinking security. I will come to that later. This is just about peace tax in general. I don't think I have to explain much for this. We don't want to pay for the military, not for the preparation of war. We are a group of any social class and faith and atheists, young and old people, and we exist for 40 years and for 25 years as a registered organization, lobbying organization at the German Bundestag, which is our national parliament. Well, I come to that later again. We have a central statement which says, I'm in favor of a legal regulation according to which no one may be forced against their conscience to contribute to the financing of military and armaments through taxes and levies. Instead, the use of these payments must be for civilian tasks. To explain this, I just want to tell you about our activity. Our activity consists in two different, or we are active in two different directions. One is to try to refuse taxes, which is in our system is not so very easy. Lincoln told me not to tell you much about our tax system, which is it's not necessary to understand our activities. It is difficult, and no one so far has succeeded to refuse paying taxes for the military on an individual basis. So we have made up here. We have developed a civil tax law and had it reviewed by two experts who are really legal experts. So we proposed to the German Bundestag, to our parliament, to pass a law which would allow the conscientious objectors to military taxation not to pay for the military, but to pay the full taxes, but only for civil uses. This is just to tell you or to show the part of the problem. This is our national budget, and most of it goes to work and social purposes. Second, it's defense, and they say it's 53 billion euro, which is not the last word. We have an additional 20 billion euros coming from a special fund that was set up after the aggression of Russia against Ukraine. And then there is quite a lot of other money going into the military, and there is NATO standard to count the money, and that is not 53.3, but it's at 91.9 billion euro. So you see that you have to be careful to choose the numbers or the amounts you are dealing with. This is just to show you how expenses have been rising during these last years. The interesting is this gray part of the in the gray figures, because that is an addition. They have set up an additional fund apart from the national budget to finance the military. And so this is just to show you, we have the text of the law we want them to pass. This is what we use to tell the public, to explain how we think this law should work. And what I want to tell you now is we are a very, very, I stop this one. We are a very small organization. We are an increasingly old organization as for the members, and but we are very, very well connected with the whole of the German peace movement. The German peace movement consists of hundreds of organizations who don't act as against one another, but we are working together. We have a national umbrella organization, Rethinking Security, and we have just come back from the Kirchentag, which is a biannual meeting of the Protestant Church of Germany. In former times, we have been invited to present the different organizations of the peace movement at that gathering. This year they refused us to present ourselves, so we set up in the same town a different event for 3 days, which was very successful. It was awfully expensive, but we managed to raise the funds, and you see me as a happy man today because it was going so well. So we have had a hard time as a whole peace movement in Germany since the aggression of Russia against Ukraine. I don't think it's much different in other countries. And so the feeling in the society is not so much in favor of peace, but the peace movement itself is working is working well, and especially it's working well together. So I think I'm quite happy about that. And on an international level, we are a member of CPTI, a member of the board with Robin and Derek, who are present today, and who will present CPTI. I think that's enough for the moment?
Can I add a minute, Derek? Yeah, and Eleanor's here too from CPTI.
Ah, yeah, Eleanor is. Yes.
Great. Thank you so much, Jan. And Jonathan Monders with Conscience UK.
Yeah, thank you, Chrissy. Before I start, I'll just say there's two other people from Conscience on the meeting today. There's Robin, who you've just heard from, who's on our executive committee, and also my colleague Faye, I think, is also on the call as well. So you might hear from her a bit later. Our full name is Conscience Taxes for Peace, Not War. We were founded in 1978, I believe. As sort of Jan touched on, regards to Germany, I won't go into a massive lecture about the UK tax system, but it is different, noticeably different to the US tax system in that you are taxed through your employer. So it's a lot harder for individuals to withhold their taxes. So as an organization, we have to work within that context and within the context of pushing for legislative change that will recognize people's right to withhold their taxes to go to military spending. So as an organization, we are built around that, but also about campaigning against the monumental military spending that we have that seems to be going up exponentially every year, particularly at the moment. And we have introduced several bills throughout the organization's history in Parliament with the aim of creating that legislative change. The last one was in 2016. We have worked to that end. It's not as if we do that bill and then we sit around and sort of cry about it or are sort of despondent about it in the years after that. Effectively, we realized that it takes a hell of a lot of research and work and campaigning to go into something like that. If we are to achieve meaningful legislative change, it will take a lot of work. And that sort of brings me on to the sort of next point. In the last year, I believe, as an organization, we've had to have a real honest discussion about changing our priorities as an organization. And that relates to the sort of to the bill and the feasibility or likelihood of getting a bill passed in the next few years in Parliament. One, obviously, the big reasons for those changing priorities is the political situation we're in and the unstable world we have, as Jan's referenced. It's with the situation in Ukraine, with Israel and Gaza, it is increasingly difficult to have the arguments and discussions that we need to have. These things become increasingly polarized and toxified, that if you are anti-military spending, that means you must be pro-Putin or whatever. And those are discussions that are very, very difficult to have at the moment. And certainly we've seen a lot of members of Parliament or politicians that would otherwise be sympathetic be quite sort of reticent to support us, at least publicly, because of that. And that's something that we need to bear in mind. Also, it's meant that the government we thought we were getting. So, for example, we had a general election last year, July 2024. A Labour government was elected, nominally left of centre. And so naturally, we thought they would be more sympathetic to our cause. However, they've proved anything but, and very unsympathetic to any talk of peace, and seem very keen to increase military spending, and very keen to please President Trump at any turn. So that is a reality that we've had to deal with. It's meant that, and particularly given the amount of members of Parliament Labour have, the dominance they have in Parliament, has meant that we perhaps aren't as confident about getting a bill passed in the short term as we were before. The other sort of priority is the other reason for changing our priorities is the financial situation that the organization is experiencing. As sort of Jan referenced for Network Friedensteuer, Conscience similarly is an organization whose supporter base has got older and has shrunk, unfortunately, over the years, and that has become an issue for us. And so it's meant that we've had to reduce staff hours, which obviously then affects the work that we can do and affects the outcomes that we can create as well. So naturally, those things combined have meant that we've had to sort of redress our priorities. Now, that could all sound very, very negative. You could frame that in a very, very negative way. But I think it's also that we've really realized the importance of building our support dramatically and trying to raise awareness as much as possible. So what we've sort of recently done with these sort of new priorities that we're sort of focusing on is really focusing on increasing the awareness about us as an organization, because the reality is for a lot of people in the UK, they are not aware of who we are and they are not really aware of the cause that we are advocating. And so it's essential that we do that, and it's essential that we get younger people on board and we basically get this conversation out there, because it's just not being discussed at the moment. And if I'm honest, a lot of wider peace issues aren't being discussed at the moment. So it's really important we do that. So that's really the main focus for us as an organization at the moment. And as part of that, we have a sort of wonderful new website, which we're very proud of. I'll give a shout out to Faye, because that's very much her baby, that website. If you haven't seen it, please go check it out. It's conscience.org.uk. It's a lot more accessible than our older website was. Lots of wonderful resources on there, and we really want to sort of show it off as much as we can. I think there's a general sort of reticence from people in the peace movement to show off. Sometimes I think we're a bit too modest. If we do something good and we build something good, we're a bit modest about showing off or showing it off or showcasing it. And I think as a global peace movement, we have to be better at that. So we try to do that with the website. And the website's got tons of resources and lots of education resources as well. One of the big things that we've done over the years is focus on educational resources to push that sort of advocacy and to educate as much as possible. We've created quite a lot of fact sheets and educational resources on our website. For example, there's a fact sheet on the history of conscientious objection to military taxation, fact sheets on conscientious objection in general, lots of fact sheets and interesting resources there. So if you haven't checked that out, we'd be really, really grateful if you did. So that's effectively the priorities for us recently and going forward.
Great. Thank you so much, Jonathan. And thanks, Lincoln, putting the website celebrating in the chat there. Now we'll hear from Doug Hewitt-White with Conscience Canada.
Thank you, Chrissy. Conscience Canada was started back in 1978 as a peace tax fund committee of Quakers, and has been in existence ever since. CC had quite a bit of early support early on, and into the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. We had a lot of members and support from elected officials. That, of course, was in a period of time when the Cold War was very much in people's minds, and the concept of mutually assured destruction generated a lot of angst and concern. And so we were a quite active organization. But we are older now, and our members are older, and our numbers are dwindling. So I I think that is reflected in other organizations as well. Um, and the number of people that use our peace tax return is indicative of how things have gone. The numbers were originally very high in the 80s and 90s and been steadily going downhill. We saw a big resurgence last year. Lincoln mentioned this, the war in Gaza, and we had a lot of young people interested in tax resistance, and the number of users of our peace tax return increased tenfold. And yet now this year, it's all gone away. We are back to where we were before. I think young people they're greatly concerned, but they want to see action. They want to see results. Tax resistance doesn't yield immediate results. In this country, our Canada Revenue Agency does not immediately go after people and try to garnish their wages. I've been a tax resister for, I don't know, a dozen years or so. Each year, the amount of money I owe slowly increases, and so far they have ignored me. They just keep sending me notices and, of course, applying interest to what I owe. I think eventually the dollar value gets high enough that they will either go after our Canada Pension Plan, old age security, attack our bank accounts, or go after revenue income. These are all instruments at their disposal. But as I say, only when dollar amounts get high enough do they bother with it. And of that, I'm grateful. And also, yes, I cheer them on. Please go after the billion-dollar tax evaders. Us small people don't need your attention. When you file a peace tax return, our peace tax return, you can do that electronically or you can do it in hard copy. But a copy automatically goes through to the Prime Minister, to the Minister of Revenue, to all the opposition leaders, and to your local member of Parliament. Very occasionally, over 12 years, I've received a couple of polite replies from the communications people in the Minister of Finance's office. And that just reminds me that it's my duty to pay taxes. And it is not my option to refuse to pay. Other than that, no reaction. So I don't think a lot of young people see that as being when they are very engaged in a cause such as the genocide in Gaza, they don't see that as being very active and generating much of a response. We have in the last 2 years considered very seriously shutting down Conscience Canada because our numbers are getting smaller all the time. And we might have done that except for the support of a lot of great people who came along and said, no, this is worth to keep going. The conversations are very important. We got support from very long-time members, including Jerry Lynn Pryor, who was a member and active member, still a member of Conscience Canada, but actually took, when Revenue Canada did come after what she owed, she actually went all the way through the courts, tried to get it all the way up to the Supreme Court of Canada, failed to do that, appealed to the United Nations Human Rights Committee. They rejected it. It's still a possibility. We keep talking about this of when Revenue Canada comes after one particular tax evader to take it through the courts. That's expensive. It takes a lot of resources. Very difficult to do. The legal case is very difficult. The right of governments to tax its people is absolutely fundamental to its viability as a government. And courts are very reluctant to see that any differently. What we base our challenge on is the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which was established back in 1983, which says that we have freedom of conscience. And we try to make the point that freedom of conscience does not mean we have freedom to have a conscience. Nobody can deny us that, but actually freedom to live by the dictates of our conscience. And that should override the right of governments to use our taxes to pay for war. Anyways, that's a very difficult challenge to make. One thing that we have done is we, for many years, as well as having the peace tax return, we also had a peace tax trust fund, whereby with people who withheld taxes could deposit their withheld taxes into the trust fund. And we maintained that for over 20 years. But the number of people using it was very small. And a number of people we couldn't even contact anymore who had funds in the account. And we don't know whether they died, whether they moved, whether they changed emails, changed addresses, but for whatever reason, they became increasingly difficult to contact. So we decided that for all of the work involved in maintaining that trust fund, the legal consequences of that, the need for annual audits, etc., it was quite costly. So we decided to close that down, and it has now been closed. We are still looking for parliamentary support for a bill, a legislative bill to go through the House of Commons to make it legal for tax resistors to divert the military portion of their taxes to peace work. We have had that bill introduced a couple of times in the past. The latest was in 2013. It has never got past first reading, which means it's, I'm sure in the UK, they understand the implications of that, but for everyone else, that just means it doesn't really get seriously considered. It only gets introduced and never gets properly debated. It's difficult to find parliamentarians willing to introduce this bill because it is not a priority for their constituents. You have very few opportunities for private members to introduce bills. There's many pressing concerns that constituents have, which will garner votes. Conscientious objection to taxation is not one of those. So it's difficult to get parliamentary support for even introducing the bill. There it is. I should just explain that in the tax system in Canada, most people pay their taxes through salary deduction on their paychecks. You don't have the ability to set how much taxes are taken off on your paycheck. You don't have the ability to reduce that amount. So at the end of the year, the vast majority of Canadians are looking forward to a refund at the end of the year. They've overpaid their taxes by a small amount and look very forward to a refund. Very few have the ability to still owe money and therefore withhold payment. The ability, there is a form where you can reduce the amount that is taken off, but very restricted reasons for that. Very difficult to do. So the vast majority of people really don't have the ability to withhold taxes. I should mention briefly our presence on the web. We have a very old and somewhat dated website, so I'm very envious of the Conscience UK website and how new and fresh and it looks and how much it's used. And we have currently no social media presence. So we know we have our challenges. But at the same time, I think we also are in a period of opportunity. In that in Canada, as you may know, we just elected a new government a week ago. We had an election campaign within the context of an American president threatening to annex us and make us into the 51st state. I'm not sure Mr. Trump would want that many more Democrats in the House of Representatives and more Democrats in the Senate. But anyways, that's a technical issue. The man says all sorts of crazy things, but it was certainly front and center in our election campaign. And so we're reframing things here in Canada. There's a new conversation opening up about how Canada becomes less dependent on the American economy, has a wider international economy, and how we defend ourselves. It is interesting that, excuse me, it is interesting that we know that we are subject to a threat from south of the border, and yet we still think that we have to increase our defense spending by almost another 50% in order to meet the NATO targets. How anyone thinks that NATO is going to be any help in resisting American aggression, I have no idea. I have no, and we're trying, we know the challenge is how to present the argument that we have to rethink security and defense, and that there's non-violent ways of doing that. But I'm leading into what Linda is going to talk about, more the new direction that CC sees itself as taking. So over to you, Linda.
Thank you, Doug. I guess just to add a few quick words to that, we had our AGM last month with maybe 12.5 people in attendance, and had some good conversations about where we wanted to go. We are also a much sort of an older group in general too, and struggling, as Doug said, with engaging younger people. The conversation focused a lot around awareness as well, and raising awareness and how to do that through the education system, because it does seem to us as well that there is generally a large focus in our society around the management of conflict using force and using militarism. And we see that in many areas. And one being, for instance, even the extreme militarized response to indigenous defenders of land and water in resisting the pipelines and things like that. They were very non-violent resistance and were met with quite intense militarized response from the government. So it's showing up in many ways. And as Doug mentioned, with this threat of annexation to the US, there has been a sort of a renewed interest, it seems to me, on the part of, especially in this election, of how we will need to increase our military budget and that kind of thing. So there seems to be a lack of knowledge of the options of non-violent resistance, and that's where we thought that we could potentially play a role in helping people to learn about those ways. And we see some of them actually playing out. There were a lot of people who refused to buy American products, for instance. And to me, that was a perfect example of nonviolent resistance. So that has been a little bit of what our direction will be. And we brainstormed ways of how to do that, getting more books in libraries, how to work our way into the education system to have more, having young people learn about this in the school systems. I personally would like to connect with Jonathan about his possible ways of introducing a bill, because I haven't given up on that as well. We have generally a similar system where our taxes are deducted by the employer. So we have to use sort of the legal changing the laws mechanism. And I have entered into conversations with the Civil Liberties Association, the law, just to see whether they can help provide us with a bit of information or a way forward. What else? Those are the main things that I think I wanted to talk about. One of our president unfortunately couldn't make it. She was going to be here, but has had an injury and that she needs to attend to. But also wanted to point out make the point that nonviolence creates a culture, so as she said it here, a culture that is not as focused on calling out as on taking responsibility. So it's not as focused on saying no, but more so what we need to build up on in order to feel right about refusing to contribute to war. So there is a focus away from the negative and onto the positive and towards a positive viewpoint. And I think the only thing I could add on a personal level too is reading the works of people who have spent their lives on nonviolent communication and nonviolence as being a way of life, how judgment is a form of violence, and how do we live our lives in a way that is deeply nonviolent. And we have good conversations within our group around that. I think that's all I have to say. I hope I've covered most of it.
Thank you so much, Linda. We also have Derek Brett from the Center for Peace Tax International to share.
Yep. Hello, everyone. Thanks, Chrissy. So my story is likely to be very historical. I don't have any notes in front of me, so I will probably forget things and say, oh, I should have said earlier such and such and such and such. But I hope at the end, if I can think of them, I might have a few reflections about where we all are going globally on this issue at present to sort of perhaps spark a wider discussion. To put you all in the historical context of Conscience and Peace Tax International, Conscience, not Centre, Conscience and Peace Tax International. Back, as you all know, particularly in the 1980s, tax resistance, peace tax movements developed in many countries more or less at the same time, building on the long American experience. And eventually in the late 1980s, the initiative was taken to bring all these national organizations together in an international conference. And the first international conference was held in Tübingen in Germany towards the end of the 1980s. And the sequence at more or less 2 yearly intervals has kept going since then. We last met, in fact, back in Germany again last October, I think it was, but with very much smaller numbers than some of our past conferences, such as the one in '98 in the United States, where there were over 100 participants. They've come together more closely as we have all shrunk, but initially the conferences were one thing, and CPTI was something that grew out of the conferences, but was completely separate. It was the conference in Hondarribia in Spain in 1994 that saw Conscience and Peace Tax International founded to bring all the different peace tax movement, to give them a forum generally, and to try and do some international lobbying for them. And very fortunately, we had at that stage on our board John Randall, late John Randall, and he achieved for us fairly rapidly the all crucial consultative status with the United Nations Economic and Social Council, which is what you need to be able to lobby at the United Nations. And we got that in 1997. Fortunately, John's wife was one of the Ghanaians who'd been brought into the UN Secretariat by Kofi Annan, who was at that time Secretary General. I'm sure that had something to do with expediting our recognition. So having got the recognition, CPTI needed to work out how it was going to be function at the UN, and they came to Geneva to the Commission on Human Rights, as it then was, and found and advertised for a volunteer to represent them at the UN. I responded and was appointed. That was in 2002. So there I was, coming into this international body and into these international meetings and wondering how to bring the peace tax issue forward. And the first thing that was quite obvious was that although conscientious objection to military service had been discussed for some time in the United Nations, there had been practically no discussion at all of the question of conscientious objection to having one's taxes used for military expenditure. There had been the solitary leading case of Gerlin Pryor from Canada, who Doug mentioned. I'm glad she's still with us. I've been assuming for years that she wasn't around anymore. That case went to the Human Rights Committee had gone to the Human Rights Committee in 1993, and they found that although conscientious objection to military service was something that was very much in their discussions at the time, that to extend the principle to citizens getting away with not paying tax was a step too far, and they just couldn't even consider this case. They slightly misrepresented what it was about. Of course, it was about redirection, not paying tax. But anyway, this decision, a couple of further cases were brought from Europe, but they were likewise rejected simply on that. Simply on the precedent of, as with all these bodies, the Human Rights Committee works very much on precedent, and once it said something, it takes a long time to change its mind on that, which is indeed the situation where it was at on the question of conscientious objection to military service, which it had made one or two fairly negative rulings on back in the 1970s. So anyway, I coming into the United Nations, and particularly looking at the Human Rights Committee, it was to work on the issue, to join those working on the issue, the small number of NGOs working on the issue of conscientious objection to military service, that I thought was the way in. If we worked on that issue and moved forward on that issue, then we could gradually also work on expanding the scope to include tax objection. But as I say, although it was by now accepted that there was a right of refusal of conscientious objection to military service, no one had managed to assert the right through international mechanisms. And this did not happen until 2006 with a case from South Korea, which came to the Human Rights Committee, and where they at last decided that people who had been imprisoned because they refused to do military service, and there was no alternative service available, had suffered a violation of their right to the freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. And while they were discussing that case, I was outside in the corridor. Of course, the discussion was in private, and helping to feed information, particularly about state practice, through into the committee members to help them in their decision. And I'll come back to that point a bit later. So we'd made the initial breakthrough in the United Nations, but then in 2010, there came the shocking news that the European Court on Human Rights, when faced with a case from Armenia of much the same nature, of someone imprisoned for not doing his military service, had found that this was not covered by the equivalent clause on freedom of thought, conscience, and religion in the European Convention on Human Rights. Fortunately, he was given the right to appeal to the Grand Chamber, to the entire court, rather than the mere subsidiary chamber that initially hears the case. And a group of us, 5 non-governmental organizations, got together. It was Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, the International Commission of Jurists, the Quakers, and myself as Conscience and Peace Tax International. And we made an amicus brief for the Grand Chamber hearing in this case of Bayach and Armenia, which was quoted several times in their in the court's judgment. And so the existence of CPTI and the issue we worked on got a little bit of publicity in that way. And fortunately, I'm glad to say they overturned the first instance and all the back jurisprudence of the European Court, and found that the European Convention did guarantee a right of conscientious objection. I should say, because this is the first time I go back again, that once we'd started drafting on our report covering international practice and the jurisprudence of the Human Rights Committee, our colleagues in Colombia were very interested in this, because they had the situation of a lot of forced military recruitment with no right of conscientious objection that they were fighting against. And we supplied them with the draft that we were working on. And Milena, who unfortunately is not with us this evening, is on the CPTI board. She was a crucial link in this. And because it had to be a domestic one, they made a submission, an amicus brief. No, they raised a case with the Constitutional Court in Colombia, which decided indeed that in Colombia too, in line with their international obligations, they had to recognize a right of conscientious objection to military service, whatever their constitution said about all Colombians must defend the state, etc., etc. So after that, I must say also, I was thinking, right, let's carry on moving this thing forward. I, in fact, ceased representing CPTI for some years and was representing the International Fellowship of Reconciliation at the United Nations, which was a larger and old established organization, and which would have hopefully have more clout in moving these things forward. And indeed, it was very useful in the sense that it got me to right into the lion's den, into Korea in 2013, where the World Council of Churches was having its General Assembly, which happens every 3 or 4 years, and we'd already got a wording of a resolution, a decision, a committee statement out of the World Council of Churches that not only recognised the right of conscientious objection to military service, but also mentioned its extension to dealing with matters of taxation. So in Korea, at the General Assembly, the task was to get a resolution of the General Assembly supporting this right, which was not by any means an easy matter. The Orthodox churches, then as now, are very much connected with the state military apparatus in their various countries and didn't give any support at all. And the Korean churches also did not want to be associated with the Jehovah's Witnesses in particular, who were the main number of conscientious objectors in Korea. And so they were very shy of this issue. Nevertheless, a small group of traditional peace churches and individuals from other churches, supported most notably by the entire German Protestant churches in alliance, managed to get a resolution from that body supporting the right of conscientious objection to military service. And as it happened, when I was in Seoul, I had managed to make contact with a Jehovah's Witness lawyer who was bringing a case to the Constitutional Court in Korea, which, as in Colombia, had hitherto refused to say said that in fact your duty to defend the state came first and foremost, and there could be no right of conscientious objection. And eventually in 2018, we actually got the Constitutional Court in Korea to change its jurisprudence and come out with that. I think that was the last major success in this line. Now, the problem was that while we were making these latter successes, in fact, things were starting to go backwards on the main issue. From the first time that Russia started meddling in Ukraine back in 2014, we had the precedent that Ukraine, which had just abolished obligatory military service, within a year reinstated it, and it was followed by Lithuania, which had abolished military service a few years earlier, but with the Russian threat reinstated it. Then Sweden did likewise. Georgia abolished military service and reinstated it within a year. And then, of course, after what we have now had is after the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022, they decided that there was no right of conscientious objection to mobilization in a time of war, that war was a much more serious issue than any of the places that this had been discussed before, and therefore there could be no acceptance of conscientious objection. They are merrily now trying to call up Jehovah's Witnesses and imprisoning them in increasing numbers when they refuse. Other states are, as I say, reintroducing conscription, putting their civilian service for conscientious objectors very much under the civil defense authorities, so that they're not really civilian at all, but under military control. Reducing the right of people who've ever done military service, or possibly sometimes even not, to object to being mobilized as reserves, etc. So So there we are. We're in a position where it has not. It is not a propitious time to get people talking about spreading the right to tax objection. And even though the jurisprudence on the main issue moved on, there was a classic case after the European Court jurisprudence had moved on, was that a case was taken by 7 tax resistors from the UK, including Robin, who's with us here, the Peace Tax 7, asking for the right to have their taxes not applied to military expenditure. And even though the European Court had moved on in its jurisprudence about the right of conscientious objection to military service, they said they just went back to an admissibility decision right back to the 1980s in a case from Britain and said, no, this is not within our remit. We will not consider this case. So here I am. I'm back with Conscience and Peace Tax International now at the UN. I think it is very important that, having achieved the all significant ECOSOC consultative status, that we do not lose it, that we maintain it, that we keep a presence, that we keep writing things and saying things in the UN, so that once every 4 years we can show the NGO committee that we're still active, so that our status can be renewed. To stay in, keep providing information on conscientious objection generally, looking all the time for what openings there might be to bring the issue further. And as I say, well, to bring the issue further. And in fact, one came up just last month. The Human Rights Council Special Rapporteur on the human rights implications of international debt is doing a report which she will present to the General Assembly this autumn on financing peace. She has somehow managed to expand her mandate to point out that so much of government revenue is being devoted to the war industry, the war economy, the military machine, and that it is very difficult to get money moved towards peace building activities. So prompted about this by Christoph from Switzerland here, who again unfortunately is not with us this evening. He's actually got a general meeting of his own NGO this weekend, so I'm sure he's very busy with that. Prompted by him, he made a submission, and I've made a submission, just pointing out basically our principles and what we have tried to achieve in the past, and pointing out that although the rapporteur is obviously looking for something broader and more inclusive, the fact of having citizens themselves coming up and volunteering to not pay taxes does a lot towards legitimizing the call for moving money to peace building, and indeed illegitimizing the extent to which it is currently used on military expenditure. So there's one or two things I was going to say. I'm trying to remember. Yes,
Derek, just we are over time, so we still have one more speaker, I believe. So just so
okay. So let me just say very quickly for the moment, and perhaps we can come back to other things in debate, in general discussion. and that is that with conscientious objection to military service, although it hadn't been widely recognised as a right by states, nonetheless, in getting it recognised as a right internationally, it was always possible to point out what states had done toward to meet the wishes of individual conscientious objectors. And this we still have not got with tax. No state has made any sort of provision. No state thinks it's ahead, that it is good, has a good record and can spread the word to others. So that is where the movement and the hopes of progress, I think, very much go back to the national level, and at that I shall shut up and let another speaker speak.
Great. Thank you so much, Derek. We also have Yolanda Barcenia from Spain to share.
Oh, wonderful.
With us.
Okay, I am in the middle of the highway. I had to stop here. I don't know if my telephone is working okay and you can hear me properly. Okay, so I will speak about our campaign in Spain. Okay, we've been doing this water resistance since 1982. It started in Andalusia in the south of Spain, and only in 1985 is when we started a state campaign collective. So proposing the same projects to divert our money and the same idea. We are for water resistance, for the abolition of armies. We don't agree with taxes for peace. I was part of the Hondarribia meeting in 1985 or 1994, and there we divided in two, the ones who wanted taxes for peace and the ones who wanted the abolition of armies. So we are still on the campaign for the abolition of armies. As a civil disobedient action, we don't want it as a personal matter for me to write a cross and be able to divert my own taxes and let others fight for me, for my country. No, we don't want anybody fighting for anybody. So we have to ask for the abolition of armies. As I said, the idea of a civil disobedience campaign has to be collective, no personal, has to be active, has to be public, openly. We sometimes get together to present our papers. But nowadays it's more difficult since everything is online, but we always try to do something together in public, and it's politic because we want this transformation of armies and disappearance of armies, and of course it's non-violent. You know, we are part of the whole anti-militarist movement in Spain. During the end of the 90s, we had more than 3,000 total conscious objectors, half of them in prison. I think it was kind of 1,400 young men had to go into prison because they were total conscious objectors. And it was a very hard time at that time. But okay, then in 2001, we got a professional army, so we don't have compulsory service, military service anymore, and we have reinvented a little bit what we want to do. We are part of War Resisters International, this big network all over the world with conscious objectors. So we try to do lots of international actions, like occupying this firing place in this military place in northern Sweden. This campaign, the war starts here. By the way, and in a week we have a very big arms fair. It's called FeinDev. It's huge. Well, Israel is not allowed to come, but all the rest are coming, and we'll have big actions because water is May is the month where we pay our taxes. So it's when we are really active in every anti-militarist action that take place in the area. So as much as War Resisters International, we are very much working together with Women in Black, who are as well proposing the campaign for all these women in the network. And at the moment, we have on a tour a group of Russian anti-militarist women from this very big group that had to abandon Russia, and they are going to be living in Spain. There is a group of 8 women who are going to Zaragoza and then to probably Barcelona, and so as well reinforcing our campaign for water resistance. Because this year, even though they say we are not paying this 2% that NATO demand us, we have calculated, and we know last year, the government spent 3.46% of our product. So we spend much more than what they acknowledge, and this comes to more than 1,100 euros each person, babies and all people. So if you count our 40 million people, it's all over 1,100 euros. So it's a very good reason to complain about, and we demand to finish with this military expenditure, to use it for social needs. And well, this is summarizing very much what I wanted to say, that we keep working internationally with anti-militarists very, very, very tight, very close together, because we are not growing very much, but we are trying to involve other young people like Fridays for Future or ecologists. And so we are always trying to involve other people to do their own campaigns. In our collective campaign this year, we've got an anti-militarist group in Israel called New Profile as an objective where we should divert our money to the money we don't want to pay. We have to, because we don't keep the money. We just, when we do water resistance, we take the money and put it in somewhere else where we think they're working for peace. And this year, our collective project is going to be New Profile in Israel, a fantastic group doing for many, many years a lot of anti-militarist work. I don't know. Well, this is maybe very, very summarized, but it's more or less what I wanted to say. I don't know, maybe it's better if we have some questions at the end, especially this difference between the ones who want taxes for peace and the ones who are for abolition of armies. Maybe we could, as then on Daribia, we could keep talking about.